Contents. Holmes had moved on, his attention now fixed upon a small oil painting that hung near the window. "Your work, Mrs. Thornwood?" he asked, gesturing toward the canvas. It depicted Camden House as seen from the garden, rendered in soft autumnal colors that gave the grim structure an almost welcoming appearance. "Yes, from 2 years ago." Edward commissioned it as a birthday gift to himself. A sad smile crossed her face. He loved this house despite its dark reputation. He used to say that buildings have no memory for tragedy, only people do. Holmes studied the painting with unusual intensity, his gray eyes moving across its surface as if searching for hidden messages. "You have a remarkable eye for detail, Mrs. Thornwood. The proportions are exact. And you have captured the architectural features with an accuracy that suggests considerable study." He paused, his gaze fixed upon the eastern portion of the painted house. "Tell me, when you painted this, did you have occasion to observe the east wing from the exterior?" "I walked the entire property to find the best vantage point." "Why do you ask?" "Because your painting shows 3 windows on the upper floor of the east wing. Yet from my observation this morning, only 2 windows are visible from the front of the house. Either your memory has embellished the scene, or there exists a window that has since been concealed." Holmes turned from the painting, a new energy in his movements. "I should very much like to examine the exterior of the east wing, if you have no objection." They made their way through the house to a rear door that opened onto a neglected garden, now brown and dormant under the winter sky. Watson felt the cold bite through his coat as they walked along a gravel path toward the eastern side of the property, where the closed wing loomed above them like a reproachful presence. The walls here were darkened with age and streaked with water stains from the damaged roof Mrs. Thornwood had mentioned, giving the structure an appearance of profound decay. Holmes stopped and looked upward, counting under his breath. Watson followed his gaze and saw immediately what had captured his friend's attention. The upper floor showed only 2 windows, both shuttered and obviously unused for years. Yet there was a space between them, a section of wall perhaps 6 feet wide, where the brickwork appeared subtly different in color. Newer somehow, as if repairs had been made at some point in the building's history. "There was a window there once," Holmes murmured, almost to himself. "Someone has bricked it over, and done so with considerable care to match the surrounding stonework. The question is why anyone would go to such trouble to eliminate a single window from an abandoned wing." He turned to Mrs. Thornwood, his expression grave. "Madam, I believe your husband discovered something in this house, something that someone was desperate to keep hidden. And I fear that discovery cost him his life." Mrs. Thornwood grew very pale at Holmes' words, her hand reaching instinctively for Watson's arm to steady herself. The doctor guided her to a stone bench that sat nearby, its surface slick with winter moisture, and waited while she composed herself. Holmes, meanwhile, continued his examination of the exterior wall, pacing along its length and occasionally stopping to press his hand against the brickwork, as if testing for some hidden weakness. "In the weeks before his death," Holmes said without turning around, "did your husband exhibit any unusual behavior? Did he seem preoccupied, secretive, or anxious about matters he would not discuss?" Mrs. Thornwood considered the question carefully. Edward was always somewhat reserved about business affairs. He believed such matters would only burden me unnecessarily. "But now that you ask, I do recall something strange. About a month before he died, he began spending considerable time in his study with the door locked. He said he was reviewing old family documents for the solicitors, but when I asked about his progress, he became evasive." "Did he mention finding anything of interest among these documents?" "Only once." Mrs. Thornwood's brow furrowed with the effort of recollection. "He made a peculiar remark at dinner one evening. He said that houses keep secrets far longer than the people who build them, and that some secrets are better left undisturbed. I thought nothing of it at the time. Edward often made philosophical observations of that sort. But now I wonder if he had discovered something about Camden House itself. Holmes nodded slowly, his attention still fixed upon the bricked-over window space. I believe he had, madam. And I believe that discovery set in motion the chain of events that led to his death. He turned at last, his sharp features cast in shadow by the gray afternoon light. Watson, I shall require your assistance. We must find a way into the East Wing, with or without the cooperation of Mr. Philip Thornwood. They returned to the house through the garden door. But as they entered the dim corridor that led back toward the main hall, they encountered an unexpected obstacle. Helena Thornwood stood waiting for them, her pale face set in an expression of cold determination that transformed her delicate features into something almost severe. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I must speak with you privately. There is something I did not say earlier, something I believe may be relevant to your investigation." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Indeed? Then by all means, Miss Thornwood, let us hear it. I trust you have no objection to Dr. Watson's presence. He is my trusted colleague in all such matters." Helena glanced at Mrs. Thornwood with evident discomfort. "I would prefer to speak without my stepmother present. What I have to say concerns her directly." A flash of hurt crossed Mrs. Thornwood's face, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. I shall wait in the morning room." She moved past her stepdaughter without another word, her dignified bearing only slightly marred by the stiffness of her shoulders. When she had gone, Helena led them into a small sitting room nearby, closing the door firmly behind her. The room was decorated in feminine taste, with watercolor landscapes adorning the walls and a collection of porcelain figurines arranged upon a delicate writing desk. Watson noticed that the young woman's hands trembled slightly as she turned to face them, though her voice remained steady. "I did not faint on the stairs, Mr. Holmes. I was pushed." Watson drew a sharp breath, but Holmes merely nodded as if he had expected precisely this revelation. "Please continue, Miss Thornwood. Tell us exactly what occurred." Helena moved to the window, her back to them, her slender frame silhouetted against the gray light. "It was 3 nights after my father's funeral. I could not sleep, and I decided to walk to the library to find a book. The house was silent. It must have been past midnight. As I reached the top of the main staircase, I felt someone behind me. Before I could turn, hands pressed against my back, and I was falling." She paused, her composure cracking slightly. "I should have died. But something broke my fall the table at the bottom, I think. I struck my head and lost consciousness." "Yet you told no one you were pushed," Holmes said quietly. "Why?" Helena turned, and Watson was startled to see tears glistening in her eyes. "Because I know who pushed me, Mr. Holmes. I felt the ring on their hand as they struck, a distinctive ring that I have seen every day for the past 5 years. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It was my stepmother. Arabella killed my father, and she tried to kill me. And unless you stop her, she will succeed the next time." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the atmosphere of the small sitting room. Watson found himself momentarily speechless, his mind racing to reconcile this terrible claim with the grieving widow who had sought their help only yesterday. Holmes, however, appeared entirely unmoved, his gray eyes fixed upon Helena with an expression of clinical detachment. "That is a very serious allegation, Miss Thornwood," he said at last. "You claim to have identified your attacker by the feel of a ring against your back. Pray describe this ring for me." Helena's composure wavered slightly under Holmes' penetrating gaze, but she pressed forward. "It is a gold signet ring with an unusual setting, a square-cut emerald surrounded by small diamonds. My father gave it to Arabella on their wedding day. She never removes it, not even to sleep." "And you are certain?" In the confusion and terror of being pushed down a flight of stairs in complete darkness, "that you correctly identified this particular piece of jewelry?" "I am certain." Helena's chin lifted defiantly. I know what I felt, Mr. Holmes. The ring caught in the fabric of my nightgown as I fell. When I examined the garment afterward, I found a small tear precisely where the stone would have snagged. Holmes extended his hand. You still have this nightgown? I kept it, yes. I knew no one would believe me without proof. Helena moved to a small chest in the corner of the room and withdrew a carefully folded garment of white cotton. She handed it to Holmes, who examined it with his lens, paying particular attention to a spot near the left shoulder where the fabric had indeed been torn. Watson watched as his friend studied the evidence, noting the slight furrow that appeared between Holmes' brows. Well, Holmes, what do you make of it? The tear is genuine, Holmes acknowledged, and consistent with a stone-set ring catching in the weave. However, he paused, holding the fabric up to the window light. The direction of the tear suggests a downward motion, as if someone wearing the ring had grasped Miss Thornwood from above rather than pushing from behind. A curious detail, would you not agree? Helena's expression flickered with something that might have been confusion or fear. I cannot explain the mechanics of it, Mr. Holmes. I only know that I was pushed, and I know who did it. Holmes returned the nightgown to her with a slight bow. I appreciate your candor, Miss Thornwood. However, I must ask you to keep this conversation strictly confidential for the time being. If your stepmother is indeed responsible for these attacks, alerting her to our suspicions would be most unwise. Can I rely upon your discretion? Of course. Helena clutched the garment to her chest. But surely you will not allow her to remain free? She is dangerous, Mr. Holmes. She married my father for his money. And now that he is dead, only I stand between her and complete control of the estate. I understood the house passes to you upon your marriage or 21st birthday, Holmes remarked. Under those terms, Mrs. Thornwood gains nothing from your death. The estate would simply transfer to another party. To my Uncle Philip, Helena confirmed bitterly. They are in it together, I am sure of it. Philip has always resented that my father inherited everything, and Arabella has given him the means to take what he believes should have been his. Holmes exchanged a brief glance with Watson, a look that spoke volumes despite its brevity. You have given us much to consider, Miss Thornwood. I would advise you to keep to well-lit areas of the house and ensure your bedroom door is securely locked at night. Until we have unraveled this matter completely, trust no one. They left Helena in her sitting room and made their way back toward the main hall, Holmes walking with the swift, distracted gait that indicated his mind was working at full capacity. Watson waited until they were safely out of earshot before speaking. Good Lord, Holmes. Do you believe her? I believe she believes it, Holmes replied carefully. Whether her belief corresponds to reality is another matter entirely. The torn nightgown is suggestive but not conclusive. Such damage could be inflicted deliberately to support a false accusation, just as easily as it could occur during a genuine attack. But why would she lie? What could she possibly gain from accusing her stepmother? Holmes stopped walking and turned to face his friend, his expression unusually grave. That, Watson, is precisely what troubles me. In this house of secrets, everyone has something to hide. The question is not who is lying, for I suspect they all are, in one way or another, but rather whose lies conceal the truth of murder. They found Mrs. Thornwood waiting in the morning room as promised, her face a careful mask that betrayed nothing of her thoughts. She rose as they entered, her eyes searching Holmes' expression for some indication of what her stepdaughter had revealed. But the detective offered no enlightenment. I believe we have learned all we can for today, Holmes announced. However, I shall require access to the East Wing before this matter can be resolved. I trust you can provide me with a locksmith's name, or perhaps a servant who possesses some skill with locks. Mrs. Thornwood shook her head. I would not know whom to ask. Philip handles all household matters of that nature. Then I shall make my own arrangements. Holmes retrieved his hat and gloves from the side table where he had left them. We shall return tomorrow morning, Mrs. Thornwood. In the meantime, I must ask you to observe the other members of this household carefully. Note any unusual behavior, any whispered conversations, any unexplained absences. And please exercise the same caution I advised for your stepdaughter. This house has already claimed one life, and I fear it hungers for more." The journey back to Baker Street was conducted largely in silence. Holmes staring out of the cab window with an intensity that discouraged conversation. Watson recognized the signs of profound mental activity and held his tongue, knowing that his friend would share his thoughts when he was ready. It was not until they had returned to their familiar sitting room, with the fire crackling cheerfully in the grate and Mrs. Hudson's tea service laid out before them, that Holmes finally spoke. "We are being manipulated, Watson. Someone in that house is orchestrating events with considerable skill, playing upon our expectations and leading us toward a predetermined conclusion." Watson poured the tea, grateful for something to occupy his hands. "You mean Helena's accusation against her stepmother? That is certainly part of it. Consider how neatly the pieces have been arranged. A widow comes to us claiming her husband was murdered. Her stepdaughter then secretly accuses the widow of being the murderer. Each woman points to the other, and we are expected to choose between them." Holmes accepted his teacup but did not drink, his long fingers wrapped around its warmth. "But what if both accusations are diversions, designed to draw our attention away from the true villain?" "Philip Thornwood," Watson said immediately. "He has the most obvious motive. If both women were eliminated, the estate would fall to him entirely." "An excellent point, and one that has not escaped my attention. Philip certainly bears watching. However, there is a piece of this puzzle that does not fit neatly into any of our current theories." Holmes rose and moved to his desk, extracting the letter he had taken from Edward Thornwood's study. "I appropriated this from among the deceased's correspondence. It arrived 10 days before his death, and its contents are most illuminating." Watson took the letter and read it with growing astonishment. It was from a firm of solicitors in Edinburgh, acknowledging receipt of Mr. Edward Thornwood's inquiry regarding the legal status of adoptions performed in Scotland during the year 1856. The letter confirmed that records from that period were incomplete due to a fire at the relevant registry office, but that certain documents might still exist in private hands if Mr. Thornwood knew where to search. "Adoptions," Watson murmured. "What on earth does this mean?" "It means, my dear Watson, that Edward Thornwood discovered something in those family documents. He was reviewing something relating to an adoption nearly 40 years ago. The question is, whose adoption?" Holmes took back the letter and studied it once more. Camden House was built by the Thornwood family in 1820. Edward and Philip's father, Marcus Thornwood, inherited it in 1852. He married in 1854 and had 2 sons, Edward in 1855 and Philip in 1858, or so the official record states. Watson felt a chill of understanding. "You believe one of them was adopted?" "I believe Edward Thornwood suspected as much, and that he died before he could confirm his suspicions." Holmes tucked the letter away and returned to his chair, his expression grave. "If Philip Thornwood is not truly Marcus Thornwood's son, then he has no legal claim to the family estate, not as trustee, not as heir, not in any capacity whatsoever. Everything he has built his life upon would crumble to nothing. That would certainly constitute a motive for murder. Indeed it would. But we must have proof, Watson, and that proof lies somewhere in the sealed east wing of Camden House." Holmes reached for his pipe, his movements suddenly energized with purpose. "Tomorrow we enter that wing, by whatever means necessary. Whatever secrets Camden House has kept hidden for 4 decades. We shall drag them into the light at last." The following morning dawned gray and bitter, with a sharp wind that cut through the streets of London like a blade. Watson rose early to find Holmes already dressed and pacing the sitting room with restless energy. a small leather case tucked under his arm that Watson recognized as his set of lock-picking tools. "I have sent a telegram to Lestrade," Holmes announced without preamble, "requesting any police records relating to the previous deaths at Camden House. If this pattern of accidents stretches back 30 years, there may be details in the official files that could prove illuminating." They breakfasted quickly and were on their way to Camden town before 9 o'clock. The hansom cab rattling through streets that were slowly coming to life despite the inhospitable weather. Watson noticed that Holmes kept checking his pocket watch with unusual frequency, a sign of impatience that suggested his friend was eager to test whatever theory had crystallized in his remarkable mind overnight. Camden House appeared even more forbidding in the morning light, its dark windows reflecting the gray sky like pools of stagnant water. They were admitted by the same nervous housemaid as before, but instead of being led to the morning room, they were informed that Mrs. Thornwood wished to see them. Immediately in her late husband's study, they found her seated behind the desk, her face ashen and her hands trembling as she clutched a sheet of paper. She looked up as they entered, and Watson was alarmed to see that her composure had completely shattered since their last meeting. "Mr. Holmes, thank God you have come. I received this under my door during the night." She thrust the paper toward them, and Holmes took it with careful fingers, holding it to the light so that Watson could read over his shoulder. The message was brief and chilling, composed of words cut from a newspaper and pasted onto cheap foolscap. "Leave Camden House or join your husband. You have been warned." "Most instructive," Holmes murmured, examining the paper closely. "The words are from the Times yesterday's edition, if I am not mistaken. The paste is common flour and water mixture, and the paper itself can be purchased at any stationer's shop in London." He turned the sheet over, studying its blank reverse. "However, the sender has made one small error. There's a fingerprint here, in the paste residue, quite clear and quite distinctive." Mrs. Thornwood pressed her handkerchief to her lips. "Then you can identify who sent it. Given time and the proper resources, perhaps. But I suspect we shall have our answer through more direct means before the day is out." Holmes pocketed the threatening note and fixed Mrs. Thornwood with a penetrating gaze. "You mentioned yesterday that your stepdaughter is prone to fainting spells. How long has she suffered from this affliction?" The question seemed to catch Mrs. Thornwood off guard. "Helena has always been delicate. Her mother died when she was very young, and she was a sickly child. Edward worried about her constantly. And these fainting spells, do they occur at predictable intervals, or are they triggered by specific circumstances?" "I cannot say. Helena keeps her own counsel on matters of health. She has a private physician in Harley Street whom she consults regularly." Holmes nodded thoughtfully, but offered no explanation for his inquiry. Instead, he moved toward the door with sudden purpose. "We shall require access to the East Wing now. Mrs. Thornwood, I trust you will not object if we employ unconventional methods to gain entry." They ascended to the gallery once more, that narrow walkway suspended above the entrance hall where Edward Thornwood had met his end. The door to the East Wing stood before them, its surface unchanged since their previous examination. Holmes knelt before the lock and extracted his tools from the leather case. Working with the swift efficiency of long practice, Watson stood watch, his hand resting on the revolver in his pocket, acutely aware of the silence that pressed in from all sides. The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what secrets would be revealed once that ancient door swung open. After several tense minutes, there was a soft click, and Holmes rose with a satisfied expression. "The lock was indeed well oiled," he remarked, which made the work considerably easier. "Someone has been maintaining this door despite its apparent disuse." He placed his hand upon the handle and paused, turning to Watson with an expression that was almost grave. "Whatever we find beyond this threshold, Watson, I fear it will be deeply unpleasant. The truth often is, in my experience." Watson tightened his grip on his revolver. "I am ready, Holmes." The detective nodded and pushed open the door. It swung inward without a sound, revealing a corridor thick with dust and shadow. Stretching into darkness like the throat of some ancient beast, Holmes produced a small lantern from beneath his coat and lit it with a steady hand, casting a warm glow into the oppressive darkness that stretched before them. The corridor was narrow and low-ceilinged, its walls lined with faded wallpaper that peeled away in long strips like diseased skin. Dust lay thick upon the floorboards, but Watson immediately noticed what Holmes had surely already observed. A clear path had been worn through the grime, evidence of repeated passage by someone who had no desire to advertise their visits. They moved forward in silence, their footsteps muffled by the accumulated debris of years. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, most of them hanging slightly ajar, revealing rooms cluttered with shrouded furniture and forgotten possessions. Holmes paused at each threshold, sweeping his lantern across the interiors, but did not enter until they reached the fourth door on the left. "Here," he whispered, pointing to the floor. The dust pattern changed at this point, showing signs of more concentrated traffic. The door itself had been recently handled. Watson could see the marks of fingers upon its grimy surface, and the hinges gleamed faintly with fresh oil. Holmes pushed the door open and stepped inside, his lantern held high. Watson followed and found himself in what had once been a comfortable sitting room, though its furnishings were now draped in white cloths that gave them the appearance of huddled ghosts. But it was not the furniture that captured their attention, it was the far wall, where a section of paneling had been removed to reveal a hidden space beyond. They approached cautiously, and Watson felt his breath catch as the lantern's light penetrated the secret chamber. It was small, perhaps 8 feet square, with walls of bare brick and a ceiling so low that Holmes was forced to stoop slightly as he entered. A narrow cot stood against one wall, its blankets rumpled as if recently slept in. A table held the remains of a meal, bread, cheese, and an apple core that had not yet begun to decay. And in the corner, stacked in neat piles, were dozens of leather-bound ledgers and bundles of documents tied with faded ribbon. "Good God," Watson breathed. "Someone has been living here." Holmes moved to the table and examined the food with his lens. "Within the past 24 hours, I should estimate. Our quarry has flown, but not long ago." He turned his attention to the documents, opening the topmost ledger and scanning its pages with rapid eyes. "These are financial records, Watson. Shipping manifests, accounts receivable, investment portfolios, the complete business history of the Thornwood family going back decades. But why hide them here? Surely such documents would normally be kept in the study, or with the family solicitors, unless they contain information that someone wished to suppress." Holmes set aside the ledger and reached for one of the ribbon-bound bundles, untying it with careful fingers. The papers within were older, yellowed with age and covered in faded handwriting. As Holmes read, his expression shifted from curiosity to grim understanding. "What is it, Holmes?" "The truth, Watson. The terrible, damning truth that Edward Thornwood discovered and died for." Holmes held up one of the documents, a legal certificate bearing official seals and signatures. "This is an adoption record from Edinburgh, dated March 1858. It confirms that Marcus Thornwood and his wife legally adopted an infant boy of unknown parentage, whom they named Philip." Watson felt the pieces falling into place. Then Philip is not truly a Thornwood. He has no claim to the family estate. None whatsoever. And according to these financial records, he has been systematically embezzling from the shipping business for the past 15 years, diverting funds into private accounts under assumed names. Holmes gathered the documents together, his movements swift and purposeful. Edward discovered the truth about both the adoption and the embezzlement. Philip murdered him to prevent exposure, and he has been hiding these documents here ever since, visiting secretly through this sealed wing to ensure they remain secure. A sound from the corridor made them both freeze, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard under a stealthy foot. Watson drew his revolver and positioned himself between Holmes and the door, his heart pounding against his ribs. The footsteps grew closer, and then a figure appeared in the doorway. Silhouetted against the faint light from the corridor beyond Dot, it was Philip Thornwood. And in his hand he held a pistol aimed directly at Holmes' chest. "I wondered how long it would take you to find this place," Philip said, his voice eerily calm. "You are everything they say you are, Mr. Holmes. Unfortunately, that means I cannot allow you to leave this room alive." Watson's finger tightened on the trigger of his revolver. But Holmes raised a cautionary hand, his eyes never leaving Philip's face. The lantern cast dancing shadows across the hidden chamber, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere for the confrontation that was unfolding. "I would advise against any rash actions, Dr. Watson," Philip said smoothly. "My pistol is already trained upon your friend's heart. Even if you managed to shoot me, my dying reflex would certainly send a bullet into Mr. Holmes before I fell." "He speaks the truth." "Watson," Holmes said, his voice remarkably calm for a man staring down the barrel of a gun, "lower your weapon, but do not relinquish it entirely. Mr. Thornwood is a calculating man. He will not fire unless he believes he has no alternative." Watson reluctantly allowed his revolver to drop to his side, though he kept it firmly in his grip. Philip smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes, and stepped fully into the chamber, positioning himself so that his back was to the wall and both men were within his line of fire. "You have been thorough in your investigation, Mr. Holmes. I congratulate you. When Arabella announced she had consulted you, I knew it was only a matter of time before you discovered this room and its contents." Philip's gaze flickered to the documents in Holmes' hand. "I suppose you have already deduced the essential facts. That you are not Marcus Thornwood's natural son, and therefore have no legitimate claim to the family estate or business." "Yes, the evidence is quite conclusive." Holmes held up the adoption certificate. "Edward discovered this among the family papers he was reviewing, along with records of your systematic theft from the shipping company. When he confronted you, you killed him and staged the scene to appear as an accident, just as you had done with the 2 previous deaths that the locals attribute to the house's supposed curse." Philip's composure flickered almost imperceptibly. "The previous deaths were genuine accidents. I had nothing to do with them." "I think not. The first occurred in 1867, when your adoptive mother fell from this same gallery. She had recently received a letter from Edinburgh. I found a reference to it among these papers, suggesting that someone was making inquiries about old adoption records. You were only 9 years old, but precocious and already aware that your position in the family was somehow different from Edward's." Holmes' voice was measured, analytical, as if he were presenting a paper to a scientific society rather than confronting a murderer.